Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the third annual Grad Futures Forum hosted by the Graduate School at Princeton University. We're delighted you could join us for the third year of this annual event, an expanded week-long professional development conference designed to meet the imperative of graduate student professional development at this moment. My name is Eva Kubu, and I'm the Associate Dean for Graduate Student Professional Development and the Director of the Grad Futures Initiative at Princeton. We held this conference to really signal the graduate school's strong commitment to preparing our PhD students for the future of work and to empowering them with the clarity, competencies, connections, and confidence they will need now and in the future. There are more than a dozen engaging keynote speakers, skill-building workshops, networking sessions, and panels highlighting diverse career options both within and beyond the academy. Our goal is to share inspirational stories, practical advice, and to facilitate connections and community among the broader graduate community. It is my pleasure this afternoon to introduce our panel on global higher education. When it comes to professional development, alumni play such a critical role in encouraging and mentoring our current graduate students. And we are truly fortunate to have such an incredibly engaged and dedicated Princeton alumni community. One of our dedicated alumna, Elise Micheles-Berger, reached out to me a few months ago when she learned of our Grad Futures initiative at the graduate school and asked, how can I help? Elise, given her role as the co-president of the Alumni Association of France, Princeton's Alumni Association of France, and her current professional role at HEC in Paris, I thought, what an amazing opportunity to convene Princeton alumni who are working in higher education institutions across the globe. Elise has a fantastic network and helped us to convene many alumni that have joined us today. We want to thank her as well as many other members of the Alumni Association of France who really helped in putting together today's event. Elise, welcome to the Grad Futures Forum.
Thank you, Ava. Thank you for having us. You mentioned my network, but this is actually all of our networks as Princeton students, staff, and alum. And I just really want to thank you. I'm very excited that this day is finally coming to fruition after all of the planning. And I would like to especially thank the Princeton Alumni Association of the UK, our neighbors, and notably Marina Mitchell, who has been you've been critical, Marina, in helping us put this event together. Let's see, on behalf of the alumni who have been planning this event, the message that we'd like to share with all of you here today is that, especially students, is that when you graduate, wherever you go in this world, there will be a community of alumni waiting to welcome you. And hopefully this evening or this afternoon for many of you will be a testament to this. So let me introduce one such alumnus, who is Professor Terrence Strick, class of 94, graduate in physics. We couldn't actually think of a better moderator. I couldn't think of a better moderator than Terrence for this event tonight. Terrence is Franco-American. He has extreme, let's say he has quite a range of experience across continents, notably between France and the United States. After pursuing his undergraduate degree in Princeton, he ventured back over to France for his postdoctorate, and then back to the United States for his fellowship, and then back to France again to the CNRS to work there. Let's see, so many things I could say about you, Terrence. Let me just focus perhaps on your research, which you could talk about more than myself, but Terrence's research focuses on single molecule biophysics. And Terrence actually runs a laboratory at the ENS where he enjoys working with doctoral and postdoctoral students on a daily basis. So with no further ado, I leave the discussion to you, Terrence.
Thanks, Elise, for your lovely introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here. And indeed, it's my turn to introduce today's panelists. We have 4 panelists for you today that live and work in France and the UK in both the social sciences and the hard sciences. I apologize for that dichotomy. But you'll be able to get a feel for institutional aspects, international aspects, and disciplinary aspects, as well as a bit of a personal description of what brought people to France in the first place. So the panel is constituted of, first of all, Alex Micheles, professor of economics at Imperial College in London, and Yang He, a professor of mathematics at Oxford. And together, they'll be sharing their perspectives on working in the UK system. On the French side, we have Cary Hollinshead-Strick, a professor in comparative literature at the American University in Paris, and Ken Ganga, a cosmologist working for the French National Center for Scientific Research and embedded in the University of Paris. So they'll tell you about what it is like to live and work in France. Before we get into the details, though, we believe that one of the important things is to give you a bit of a sense of the level of motivation and some of the personal experiences and reasons that brought all of the panelists to Europe. And so we wanted to start with Alex, please.
Hello from me as well. My name is Alex Micheles. The main reason I returned to Europe is because I come from Europe. I was born and raised in Cyprus, which is in the Eastern Mediterranean, and I studied in the US. Had a Fulbright scholarship. So on my passport, I had this very important stamp that said I had to go and do a 2-year home residency requirement, and that was the main reason. After my PhD, I returned to Europe. In fact, I spent 2 different stints of 3 years at the University of Cyprus, and in between, I was at the London School of Economics, and now I'm at Imperial College. And so the main reason I returned was, in fact, visa related. And I can talk about that later, and how that developed if questions come up. You're muted, Terrence.
Thank you. We will just wait a moment for Terrence to come back. While we're waiting for Terrence, we're going to ask Kerry to join us on the screen and ask her what brought her to Europe.
Okay, thanks. Well, I'd say a combination of academic and family reasons brought me to Europe. I actually came while I was working on my dissertation, which had to do with French literature, so it made a lot of sense to be in Paris. Also, full disclosure, I'm married to our moderator. That was a family reason to come to Paris. So those 2 things made for a compelling argument in favor of the place. I ended up sort of in the position that I'm in now through a series of events that started with adjuncting during my dissertation years at the American University of Paris. Shortly after I received my doctorate, I chose to continue adjuncting with them, and about a year after that, I was able to get a permanent position still at the American University of Paris.
Thank you very much, Kerry. And now we're going to move to Ken.
Hi, everyone. As I said, my name's Ken Ganga. I've been in Europe in Paris in particular for over 15 years now. And even before that, I was working.
They're all too close. Sorry, just move a little bit back, Ken. Sorry.
Okay, is that better? No. So I've been working here for over 15 years, but even before I came here, I had been working with the European Space Agency, the French Space Agency, on astronomy satellites, basically. So I'm a cosmologist. I have my degree in physics from Princeton, and I went on to do cosmology at Caltech and JPL. in those places, I was working on a series of satellites that were actually collaborations between the US and various European countries there. And so basically it was getting tiring. I was going back and forth 10 times a year between Los Angeles and Europe, which gets to be a lot. At one point, I was invited to spend a year as an invited lecturer, basically, and I liked it. And so a few years later, I started applying for jobs here, and I got one. And so there was also a very exciting experiment called the Planck satellite that I worked on. And honestly, my girlfriend was also French at the time, so it was the perfect solution for me to come over here. I think we're going to be giving advice here. One of the things I would say, it is very nice to come over with a senior position, and it makes things easier to do later. You should think about when you want to come. If your intention is to come back to Europe, or you really want to be in Europe, it makes a difference whether you come early or late, and we can talk about that later. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ken. Now we're going to move to our last panelist, Yang Hui He. And apologies for if I mispronounced that.
That was perfectly fine. Hi, my name's Yang. And so after Princeton, I did a master's, the TRIPOS program in mathematics in Cambridge. That was a one-year thing, and I kind of fell in love with the UK. And then I went back to the States to finish my to do my PhD at MIT, and then I did my postdoctoral work. And then, gosh, it was 15 years ago. There was a junior faculty position opening up in Oxford, so I moved to take up the position. And I know this is a sort of advice to young people. And then I met a Brit, so I married her, and so I've kind of gone native. So I've been in the UK ever since. So I had my life. I spent my life sort of traveling around the world. I was born and raised in China. Then I went to school in Australia and Canada before going to Princeton, and I sort of went all around. And now, because of my marriage, I sort of feel like UK is my home now. Thank you very much. I think, Elise, you're muted.
My apologies. Yeah, we temporarily lost Terrence, who will be back with us in a moment. But in the meantime, let's continue the conversation. Yang, if you're, whoops. Yes, I'm seeing the screen, but I'll just keep going. So I'd like to take us back to Alex. Perhaps, Alex, you can shift us to the more professional side to share with us some of your perhaps initial formative experiences and advice that you may have for potential future students joining you in the UK, and especially, in, may I just add that, in the business field, of course.
Yeah, so I'm currently at a business school, and there is a lot of demand actually for to hire a lot of talent actually, and it's become an international market. We at Imperial and also other schools in London, and many schools in Europe actually go to the American job market. For us, it works that we go in January so that people start to work in August or September. But of course, there's a big distribution of universities out there, and some of them still do not go to the American job market. So if you come from a particular country, and in my case it was Cyprus, and you could still try to approach people in that university. There's no harm doing that actually, so that people know that you exist essentially, and that could be one way to increase your opportunity set, because as long as you keep doing research, as long as you go to the right conferences, back in typically in the US, but nowadays you can also have very good conferences in Asia and in Europe. as long as you keep in touch, you can always move if that's the goal. But you can also have a career also these days outside the US. A lot of universities in many countries are doing quite well, and they can actually pay good salaries, and they are trying to improve. And that is something to keep in mind, that there is a world out there outside the United States, which was not the case maybe 30, 20 years ago. And everything I'm saying is relative. So these are relative statements, but that's something to keep in mind, that there's a lot of positions out there, and you should not you should try to have an open view of where you might end up, because you don't know where the right opportunity and the right time will come.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Alex. I'm going to transition back to Ken for your comments.
Yeah, I would probably echo some of the things that you just heard. I have to say, when I first got here, things seemed just like the United States to me. And it was only after a few years that I started to really understand that there are some basic differences here. I work for the CNRS, the Centre National de Recherche Scientifique. But one of the things that is interesting here is that there are far more different institutes. I always thought in the United States that you just get a job at a university and you do research. But the CNRS, for example, with them, I don't actually teach. It's different from the university. But we do work with a lot of university professors who do research, and they do teaching. But in addition to that, there's all kinds of other institutes that have similar roles. So, for example, there in my field, I'm as I said before, I'm a physicist. There's the Centre d'Énergie Atomique, basically the Atomic Energy Center in France, and they do a lot of physics, and in particular a lot of astronomy as well. So we do a lot of collaborations with them. And even within the CNRS, there are what they call different institutes, different parts of this. I'm in the particle physics group, but there's basically the astronomers group, which is different from the observatories group. We don't work with the so-called grandes écoles that much, although I do have some collaborators from there. And so the thing I just wanted to emphasize is that like you heard from Alex, there are a lot of different possibilities for getting jobs, permanent jobs or postdocs. And I think it's important to say that you really should talk to somebody. You might see one ad in one place, but you don't actually have you won't have a complete view of all the possibilities unless you talk to a specific person who can give you some help. And it's probably different in different countries. It'll probably be different in France than in Austria. Germany is a mystery to me. So one thing I would underline, if you want to come to Europe, you should talk to somebody sort of on the ground here. And I think that's what I wanted to emphasize here. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Ken, for that. I wonder, Kerry, if you could bounce off that in terms of, speaking with someone to help you understand the ins and the outs before you arrived, and also the idea of research versus teaching in your field of humanities.
Most important thing you can do if you're looking to work in France, and I suppose probably elsewhere in Europe too, is to be in touch with someone who is ideally in the institution that you're hoping to get a job in. Ask your mentors, ask your acquaintances, figure out if you can find a connection. If not, head for HR, but do speak to somebody who's in that position, because there are a lot of particularities, institution by institution. I would say within my field, so I teach literature, the biggest distinction is between public and private universities. The place where I teach is a private university. There are a few of them, though it's certainly not sort of the majority part of the landscape. And In my case, for example, we function very much like an American liberal arts university. We're accredited in the US, and getting a job with us will look pretty familiar for people who are used to the American job market. It's a pretty similar setup. We advertise in the Chronicle for Higher Education and so on. That said, most people working in universities in France are in the public system, and it is an entirely different approach, where, for example, you need to go through a step called qualification, qualification, where you submit your the reports on your doctorate and your publications, your CV, and so on within a certain window. And then you apply for jobs after that. So it's quite important to get sort of on-the-ground advice about how to navigate this.
Thank you, Kerry. So I'm just checking. I think we might have had Terrence back with us. Or not yet. Work in progress. Okay, we have Terrence. And as Terrence is joining, we're just going to transition over to Yang for your input from the UK.
All right. Thank you very much. So actually, I've just been thinking, I've got a slightly complicated set of affiliations in my career path. Since I moved to Oxford about 15 years ago, I think my career has been additive, to use a mathematical term. So this gives me a sort of a perspective on UK academia from sort of three different perspectives, which are my three affiliations. So after my junior faculty position in London, and I'll tell in Oxford, and I can tell you a little bit what it means for a junior fellowship, or and an advanced fellowship means in Oxford. And then I took up my professorship in City University of London. And then about last year, I've actually been recruited, and I mainly moved my time now to the London Institute for Mathematical Sciences, which is housed at the Royal Institution, and that's a pure research position, which is something I really, really enjoy. I do enjoy teaching, but I'm transitioning mostly into a pure research position with a little bit of component for public lectures. So that's one of the roles that we do in the London Institute. So and luckily, as I said, it's been additive. So every time I leave a place, the place is not offended enough for me to so there's like, would you like to continue to be affiliated for some reduced affiliation with them? So this, what the kind of stuff that I do is the interface between mathematical physics, between the physics of superstring theory and algebraic geometry, which is a branch of pure mathematics, and so it's a very exciting field. So, but it's also very you're sort of very much in your own world of mathematics and not worried about the outside world. So that's why the research component of that is particularly heavy. I do enjoy teaching, and I think most UK institutions will have this teaching component. So I emphasize this. The reason I went to this London Institute is because it is actually the only purely independent research institution in the mathematical sciences. So that's kind of been my path.
Thank you, Yang. I'm going to leave Terrence the floor to continue.
Yeah, and at least don't go too far in case my configuration blows up again. So as our attendees can gather, there's a very diverse landscape of institutions in Europe. I guess something else that you'll understand is the very close geographical proximity of all of these institutions probably means that there's a high level of fluidity. And so, people are able to move around perhaps geographically, certainly quite easily, and institutionally, the connections are strong because of these geographic proximities. So that's, I think, a big difference with respect to the U.S. is everybody's within, a couple of hours of travel from one another. So we're moving right along. We had another question, I think, that was potentially going to be interesting, which is, is there an a priori that you came to Europe with, maybe not you, Alex, but maybe, you'd spent time in the U.S., maybe things had changed in ways that you didn't expect it when you came back. were there things that you individually were expecting when you came to Europe that really surprised you, that it was not what you had expected? Ken, can you start for us?
Sure. In the beginning, everything seemed normal to me, but then every once in a while, I ended up having you do have surprises ultimately, and honestly, that was one of the reasons I wanted to come here. So I tried to make a little list of some of the things, some appropriate things that surprised me here. And in particular, I mean, one of the easy ones, and again, if there's one thing you should remember, it's just talk to somebody, because there are little differences everywhere. And so as an example of one of these things that could trip people up, the dates for applications for things are different. I do this as an alumni, Princeton alumni. I've done interviews as well. And I've noticed that the only people who applied, who I interview, are Americans, and it's because the French aren't even thinking about applying to school at the right dates for Princeton. It's much earlier in the U.S. And there are similar things for applying for jobs over here. The dates can be different. So talk to people and and let people here help you navigate the system. I mentioned before that when you come, I came here with a fairly senior position, but there are a number of people who might want to come much earlier, and in fact, that's one of the things that surprised me. That really surprised me. I think it would even be illegal in the United States. For a lot of these positions, they target young people, so there are a lot more junior positions than senior positions that are available, and it's not a strict quota, but for the CNRS, where I work for, they do push the hiring committees to hire people, say 3 or 4 years out of their thesis for a permanent position. That doesn't mean it's impossible earlier or later. That would be illegal. But there is a lot of pressure to hire people around that time. So if you really want to come to France, at least, you should be making sure that you apply for jobs at that period. And that shocked me when I learned that, honestly. And then we could talk, if you have questions about specific things, I'm sure we could answer them. Other things that surprised me, my university has changed names 3 times since I've been here. For a place that has some of the oldest universities in the world, the fact that my email address changes every time my university changes. Let's see, and I think this is probably fairly common. The funding environment is a little more difficult here than it is in the States, and I've often been surprised when you want to get money on a European level, they encourage collaboration a lot more. You really need to find people in other countries and other institutes far more than I ever thought about in the United States. And I'm sure if I had 20 more minutes, I could come up with 20 more, but I'll let other people talk about this as well. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Yang, what would you say surprised you the most?
Yeah, one of the first things that really surprised me is because it's when I came to Oxford, it was my first teaching job, and it was so I came in, and so this is a good time to explain what a junior fellowship is. So in Oxford, there are the junior fellowships, which is sort of equivalent or possibly slightly higher than a postdoctoral fellowship. Then above these junior fellowships, there's this sort of named junior fellowship. So I got one of those, which means it also has a teaching component. The junior fellows in Oxford do not have this teaching component. But when you have one of these named ones, mine was called the Fitzjames after some bishop that died in the 15th century. They like this kind of thing. It was something that really surprised me. That I was teaching students for the first time, and then there was this little amount of money that's in my payment, and which said entertainment budget, and I was like, what is that? And they said, well, you can buy wine with it. You can serve wine with your tutorials and stuff. And I was like, you got to be kidding me, right? In America, this is a lawsuit. I'm serving alcohol to minors, but the English culture is you're highly encouraged to socialize, which okay, it's depends how you take it, but I think it's meant to encourage this very deep bond between mentor and student, and where you talk about philosophy or mathematics over a glass of wine, which I understood that there's less of a culture than in America, with less of a frat culture drinking. But this is much more of like let's just discuss philosophy over a glass of wine kind of culture, which I find is a much more I find that much better in Europe in this sense.
That speaks to indeed, and that speaks to something that I noticed. I think in coming to France is the proximity with the advisor and the mentors is enhanced in Europe, probably because of the slightly smaller sizes of the institutions on average. And so indeed, the slightly more restricted nature of the size of as Ken said, it's a bit harder to get 5 or 6 grants concurrently as a PI. So typically you're going to be working with a smaller number of students, and you're going to be working with them every day. They're going to see you every day. You're not going to be dropping by your office or your lab once a week. You're going to be there typically more often, and so the contact is privileged. I want to insist on this for the graduate students. The contact that you'll find with your advisors in Europe is extremely close, and you'll really be mentored in the full sense of the term. You won't be thrown off for months and only see your advisor every now and then. That's not the way the European systems tend to work, at least in my experience. But Alex, what would you have to say about all of this?
I would agree with that because the PhD programs are a bit smaller in numbers here. We have a lot more interaction with PhD students. One thing that is surprising that is related is that at least in the UK, the teaching term is much shorter than in the US, and therefore the teaching load is actually quite lower. So that frees a lot more time to do research and do other things that you might be interested in doing as part of your research position. The other thing that is surprising, that was also what I was told 25 years ago, but I still, in the last 7 years, at least at Imperial, we have found to be the case, is that there is somewhat of an aversion of people to actually move outside the US and get a position internationally, which I think sometimes this might be a mistake. We did in the last 7 years, at least I used to be the head, is what we call the chairman of the department here. And we have managed to hire two people from Columbia Economics, one person from Chicago Economics in the last 5 years. But we have made many offers to PhD students from the US, and they tend to take positions in different places around the US. The idea being that a lot of people tell them that you have to stay in the US in your first job. And it is not obvious to me that is, maybe that was the case 20 years ago when I moved, but I think right now there's many places in Europe, at least in economics and finance that I know, that compete quite well with many top places, and therefore you should not be dogmatically against trying even for a year at least a place, basically another university somewhere else, because if you have an offer from somewhere in the US that you're interested in, they will not probably defer that for a year if you ask politely, and it's good for that university as well, because you expand your network, which is a very important thing. I'll stop there.
That's super interesting. Now I'll come back to this in a few minutes, but indeed, I think Europe in general is raising its profile to try to attract more PhD students after their work in the US. Cary, what would you say was your biggest positive and negative surprise coming to Europe?
Well, I guess I have maybe a positive surprise. Certainly was the extent to which seminars, graduate seminars, research groups are quite open, and in a place that's as centralized nationally as Paris is, you can just go to all sorts of talks and conferences. Nobody's even going to necessarily ask you to sign up, certainly not to pay, and that's really enriching, particularly if you're not from sort of this academic environment to begin with. You can just go and talk to people and see what's going on. So I've found that terrific. One thing which has sometimes been complicated in the end, I'm not sure, actually it's probably more of a positive than a negative for me though, is the extent to which jobs are regulated by French employment law, which is to say that a really key term becomes whether or not you have a CDI, a indeterminate term contract, a permanent job. And if you're used to the tenure system, a CDI works a little bit differently. It can actually be a more sort of comfortable setup, but if you work here, work according to these rules, and you'll come to learn how they govern things.
So I think we don't have a lot of time left. Something I wanted to ask you guys also is, what do you see as some of the most important changes and evolutions? Maybe, not in the last 10 years even, but is there anything in the last few years that you've seen, last 2-3 years that you've seen that really surprised you? I'll say in France, the increase in teaching in English has been rapid. The increase in fluency in English has been dramatically rapid. And so the linguistic environment is changing very quickly here in France, at least. Ken, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I would just add to that. When I first came here, I learned to speak French because nobody in my group actually spoke English, or nobody in my group wanted to speak English with me. That has changed completely now. So we do all of our group business in English. A lot of it is because we are also trying to attract the university with which I'm associated, is trying to attract more foreign students, and in particular a lot from the Far East as well. And so it's just not a question of people learning English and then French on top of it. They're here for, a lot of the postdocs are here for a couple years. The students are here for a few years. Everybody knows some English, and the French, most of the French, all of the French researchers you will work with will speak French. They're embarrassed if they don't speak English very well. The only place you might have some problems is if you start doing administration, like the administration at some universities, and if you have to do administration in the city, sometimes there'll be more reticence to speak English. But in general, I have a number of people in my group that work very well with only English.
Yang, what would you say has been the big change in your environment recently?
Right. So I feel I think like two things. One on the graduate level, one on the undergraduate level. I feel like the length for the PhD here in the UK has gone up a bit. So the American PhD is usually like 5 to 5+, and even 5 years ago, the average PhD here would be like 3 years, which I think is a bit too short, and the American is a bit too long. So now you are actually generally funded for your PhD for 4 years, which is a nice compromise. You take kind of the average, and you could just see this in the last couple of years. And on the undergraduate level, I feel like the undergraduate university fees have gone up quite significantly. So in the UK, there are no or near to no private universities. All universities are state universities, and so the fees right now, I think, is on the order for undergraduates of about £10,000, which is still nothing compared to to Princeton or Harvard. But it used to be like nothing, and then went up. Even the last 10 years, I think this figure at least doubled in the last 10 years. So there's this sort of both the undergraduate landscape and the graduate landscape have changed quite significantly in the last 10 years in the UK.
Alex, what have you seen in economics
The internationalization is actually becoming a big thing. So a lot of continental European countries are doing a lot of programs actually in English. So they're kind of double streaming, where one stream is the local language, but then there's another stream which is in English, and that's an intentional effort to basically make the programs more international. Partly to bring some fees in, but also that allows the universities to hire actually people who are not necessarily nationals of that particular country, and that will improve educational outcomes and quality over time. So a lot of countries are doing that. That's one big thing. And then the other thing, I guess COVID has affected all of us. A lot of we're doing this online, so you have a lot more access to events like this, and that applies to conferences. So it works both ways, in the sense that you can attend a conference now, even in the future, if it's going to be hybrid, or we go to a Netflix model where you can always see a lecture online later, and that's useful. The problem then is that your time becomes a binding constraint. So I guess you need to have very good time management skills in order to have access to that. But at least it's something you have access to. I don't think you had access to that before. So if you graduated, let's say 30 years ago, and you ended up in a country very far away from the center of where all the conferences were, it becomes quite difficult to keep up. Nowadays, I think that nowadays you can do a lot better, given how things have developed over time.
And Cary, what would you say about the big changes?
Well, I would follow on with a related comment, which is that it's really been an advantage for me to be able to ask my students in Paris to attend talks given in the United States at 11 p.m. But, they can hear one of the authors they read in class yesterday giving a live talk and taking questions from them if they so choose. That wasn't the case before. It used to be I had to come back from the conference and report to them about what I saw. Now they can actually be on it, which is pretty great.
Yeah, so there's really been a compression of all of our spaces, and we don't have to travel as much, which is efficient and certainly better for the environment. And our ability to spend time doing the things that we care about rather than spending it in airports. I think we're getting close to the end of the panel's key points that we wanted to transmit to you. You'll notice that there's a lot of little detailed things that we did not address. We haven't spoken about salaries. One reason I think is that if you talk about salaries, it's extremely important. It doesn't make sense to talk about salaries without an in-depth conversation about the costs of living in a country, which actually has to be held up vis-a-vis to the salary for it to make sense. So there's a lot of differences in the cost of living between the U.S. and Europe. For instance, cell phones cost very, very little money. We spend 30 euros a month on a cell phone plan, and so in the U.S. I know that people devote significant sums of money for their telecoms. So there's a lot of little things, healthcare costs, a lot of different things, meaning that it's hard to have those to just give you a link or a number that will make sense to you. So for that kind of information, again, as Cary said, you have to as everybody said, you have to get in touch with the people who inspire you, who you want to learn from, and whose directions you want to learn about, and then take tangents of your own from. And they'll give you the insights as to where you can apply, where you can get funding, where you can find additional activities to further yourself, such as learn to teach, which you've probably already done at Princeton, but maybe you'll be able to teach lecture courses and not just tutorials. So these things, again, we encourage you to speak trying to have a detailed conversation with the people who you may find as mentors for you. So if I'm not mistaken now, I think we have a segment where we can take some questions. I don't know if our directors have fielded any. but you can see that there is a global interest in this Global Graduate Futures Forum. I think you really have a great chance to have such a dedicated team of administrators, deans, people who will counsel you in how to continue your career. This is really one of the great strengths of Princeton, and I think all the panelists here recognize that. And if we're here to talk to you, it's to give back to the community, everything that allowed us to take off in our own careers after our undergraduate or graduate studies at Princeton, which is an exceptional place of which there are no copies in the world. Although I'll just have a joke, which is, École Normale Supérieure is said to be the Princeton of Paris, and Princeton is said to be the École Normale Supérieure of New Jersey. But so there's a great proximity in the institutions where the six of us work, and the spirit of research and teaching and commitment to undergraduates and graduates and education that you'll find at Princeton. So I think we can all see some of these questions below us. Who would like to address this? In the French or British systems, how is the expectation for academic service similar to or different from that of the US system? Who'd like to take that one?
I mean, I can try. I haven't actually ever worked in the end in the US system, but we are an international university. We have colleagues who have joined from the US, and there is the expectation that you need to do some academic work or internal kind of, different departments and different universities have different percentages of what you're supposed to be doing in terms of research, teaching, and service. But the service is always there because there has to be some component of getting things done. You have a PhD program, people have to make admissions decisions to that, admissions to the some rules internally, seminar organization. The job market is a big thing because that's typically a big part that determines how to do things. Then there's a promotions procedures. Then you need to ask for people have to do these things, and in that sense, I don't think it differs that much from the US system. But there is a variance. There is a distribution of outcomes depending on the university.
If I could add a bit to that, to some extent, when graduate students or postdocs are provided these services to accomplish, they may seem to be tasks at some level, but don't doubt for a second that they're simply training for what you will be doing later. And so you can view these as opportunities to test yourself out at these different subtasks that make up academic life. It's not just about, indeed, doing your own research and publishing papers, but there's service on committees. There is service in selecting the next generation of students. There is teaching. There are committees to follow and monitor students who are unhappy and who need support. And so all of these tasks are long-term growth avenues. And so getting a chance to do service at the earliest part of your career will reinforce your CV, will give you a real solid thing to write about, not just over a semester, but over a few years, and will really reinforce your and strengthen your own confidence in then applying for those academic jobs in which you are supposed to do 30 things in parallel. Ken.
No, go ahead. I was just going to underline what you said. I am not a professor, so in principle I don't have to teach, but I do have to do a million of these other service things. And if you come here and you want to get a promotion or a permanent job, you really need to be able to highlight these services. It's actually very hard to get a permanent job here on science alone. You really do have to show the capacity for animating a group, things like that, or helping get money and things like that. You must do more than just research if it's teaching and other things.
We have another question. How is teaching at your institution different from teaching in North America? So I think everybody should chime in here one by one. Yang, would you start, please?
Yeah, sure. So it's actually in the UK, the PhD students don't generally teach. So in America, the PhD students are sometimes RAs or research assistants or TAs, teaching assistants, or some combination of the two. Here, there's very, very minimal teaching expected of the PhD students. So the professor will have to do everything. We got a grade. We have the grade. We don't have any TA help, which is it's a bit daunting. But I guess there's a trend toward UK universities giving more teaching experience to the PhD students, which I think is a very good trend.
Yeah, just to jump in again, if you don't teach, you'll have a hard time in the future attracting students to your own research projects. And so don't miss the fact that if you find yourself in a pure research institution as a postdoc or as a young scientist, it may be difficult to hire and find people who want to join you in your own efforts. Cary, could you tell us a bit about how the teaching loads and that you find at American University in Paris work?
Sure. So we mostly have relatively small classes. As I say, it's something like a liberal arts college in the United States. I'd say the major difference is that students come from over 100 different countries, and that perhaps particularly when you're teaching literature, that can have a big effect on sort of their angles of analysis when they're reading things, and just on classroom discussion more generally. You can often see that if you look at something that deals with intergenerational questions and suddenly people start talking about their grandparents, you can have 6 or 7 vastly different stories in the room, depending on whether somebody has joined us from Senegal or from Lebanon or from France, etc.
So what you may hear from Cary's answer is that indeed the flux of international students in Europe is different from the flux of international students to date in the U.S. And so indeed in our universities, institutions, I think we see probably a fair amount of Eastern Europeaners, people from North Africa, people from the Near East and the Middle East, probably in proportions that are different from what you see in the U.S. Alex, what do you think about how teaching happens at Imperial?
Well, it is actually the term is actually shorter in terms of length, and that makes a big difference. So in the US, you have whether it's a quarter or so it's more like a quarter system here. But the quarter is sometimes if you go to Oxford or Cambridge, then it's only 8 weeks, and ours is essentially 9 weeks for all practical purposes. So that's really a short period of time, or shorter at least than the 15 weeks you're used to in the US. So that frees some time. But then in those 9 weeks you follow a similar approaches in the US. But again, there is a distribution. I mean, there are many universities in the UK still have this idea that you basically take an exam at the end of the year, and therefore it's not like you do problem sets every 2 or 3 weeks and you have midterms. So that could be different. But over time, my observation is that many universities are moving towards more the American system, where you have a semester, these 10 weeks or 9 weeks or 8 weeks, and then you do the exam at the end of those terms. So that's very similar to the US, basically.
Ken, could you want to jump in on any of the experiences that you've had in the classrooms? Or
I don't actually teach, so I can't give very much wisdom. But The professors I work with, I would underline what Alex just said, is that the term is short enough that they can go away for significant time after they've taught. But then there's also some strange things, like at my university, the lecturers and the professors don't seem to have any control over when they teach, for example. I don't know if it's the same at the other universities, but it's staggering. It changes every year, and it throws our entire group into chaos sometimes. But anyway, it is the professors here. From my point of view, it's fairly similar. A little more time on their own and a little more rigid in scheduling.
Mm-hmm. I think what you're speaking to is indeed the French system right now is undergoing, I don't want to say upheaval, but it's really testing itself. It's really trying to transform itself to offer a more visible cross-section to the world, a more coherent cross-section. As you said, University of Paris changing its name and all these things. We're making vast efforts to present a more unified front to the rest of the world. So there's a great question here from Anonymous on Slido, which, if I've created a syllabus for American universities, is it likely that they will translate to the UK or French systems? Cary, could you start?
Sure. So at the place I'm at, an Anglophone private university, yes, it would translate pretty neatly. I would say, as a general principle, that you want to look into what the courses at the place you're heading to look like, just to make sure that there's a little bit of matchup. Most places have some versions of at least course descriptions, sometimes syllabi online. So try to do a little bit of advanced research. As far as public universities in France, often what you've prepared will be useful to you. And I would say that, at least in my experience, the teacher training that I had in graduate school was very helpful when I did some teaching within the French system, and things that I thought were kind of normal were perceived as being sort of pedagogically interesting and innovative. So I don't know whether that's always the case, but I would say that if you have some experience, even some training in pedagogy within the American system, it's going to put you in a pretty good position as far as teaching in France is concerned.
Yang, could you tell us your perspective on this question?
I think for subjects like mathematics, the material is very standard. And at the undergraduate level, I think you can just to echo what Alex was saying earlier, you do have to compress the term time a little bit, because we don't have 12-week terms. We have either 8 or 10. Somewhere between 8, 9, and 10, depending on university. So you got to compress it a bit. Other than that, the material will translate very standard way.
Alex, I think you get the last word.
Yeah, so a syllabus should not be static, actually. So in the social sciences, it might be a bit different. There is this home bias, actually, we call it, where a lot of the home bias, in the sense that a lot of the research and the data sets that people have been using for many decades are very American-centric, basically, because a lot of the journals the top journals are based in the US, but that over time is changing, and over time you are speaking to an international audience, and then there's a crisis in Russia or in Turkey or in Lebanon, and you're teaching, let's say, finance or macroeconomics or currency crisis. It's and you have people from those countries in the room. You might want to consider adding some aspect of that might not be necessarily in the syllabus to begin with. So, but those are small changes. Pretty much we teach based on what you would do in the US.
I think, well, Ken, you may not be teaching, but you know students, you know professors, and you've studied physics in the US, and you've seen the students go through in France. Do you find that the structures of teaching physics are the same in both countries, or the curricula are structured in the same way?
You're right. I don't have a really strong opinion on this, but I am impressed with the math. I mean, as a physicist and as a cosmologist, we need a lot of math, and I am impressed with the French students and basically most of the students who come in with their preparation. My impression, and I don't know how to quantify this, is that the lower up through high school and college education in France is really good, and that really prepares graduate students for I guess it would be similar in mathematics, but for doing the math that we need in cosmology, they're very well prepared.
That's a really important point that you just made. Thank you very much. And actually, so a question that one could ask you again: do you feel implicated by this habilitation process, which actually is indeed a bit of a Damocles sword over a lot of people's head here in France?
Yeah, so this is one of the things. I actually came here with the senior position, so I didn't have to do an HDR, an habilitation. It is a lot of work for a lot of people. I can say in our work, it is a big part. So in physics, cosmology, astronomy, the kinds of things I do, it is a big part. It's a big step, and it's a big hurdle for people. So I don't know if everybody who's watching us knows what this is, but it's sort of like an extra degree you have to do before you can do some kinds of teaching and directing students and things. I came here with a certain position, so I didn't have to do it. But if you come here young and go through the initial stages of your career here, you will have to do it. And it's not impossible. It's one of these things that you have to take a semester or a year and write another 50, 100-page thing, at least in our field. And you have to have enough material to do this. And so that means you have to do it after you've started redoing research. And honestly, a lot of people want to keep doing their research. They don't want to write this extra document here. And so it is a little difficult to go through, but everyone gets through it sooner or later. And there's a lot of institutional pressure for you to do it as well. We get allocated numbers of students from doctoral schools, for example, based on the number of people in our institute who have these habilitations. So you will start to get pressure from people like me and lab directors saying, you really have to do your HDR, you really have to do your HDR. So there is extra work there, yes.
I know, Cary, you've been spared this because you're working in the U.S. system. Is the HDR important in the UK?
No.
Not that I know of.
No.
So I think here we're talking about the proximity of France to Germany, where you're Herr Doctor Habilitation. Indeed, it's a mini PhD. You have to have shown that you've already trained a student. And if you've trained a student without having the authority to sign up a student in your name, that's in fact this kind of limbo that you can find yourself in for a few years, where a professor has to vouch for you. So there's kind of a validation process that builds up ahead of steam before you're allowed indeed to go and take students and just to avoid situations where you are putting people on the wrong track, obviously. So the habilitation is important in France, indeed. Perhaps not for people who come at the postdoctoral level. It's going to be maybe a few years after that. And in the UK, it doesn't seem to be as important. And I think France is moving in that direction. They're trying to make it more of a formality, but it remains an important moment, as Ken was saying.
It's a hurdle still.
So I think we've even gone a bit over time, but that's because we're having a great conversation, and I certainly don't have any feeling that we are being forced to interrupt it. So indeed, we haven't talked much about this, the Grandes Écoles. So the Grandes Écoles, if I can make, I don't know, Ken, why don't you start maybe?
Well, I don't work at a Grandes Écoles. I think you will be hundreds of times better than me at this.
Easy. Okay.
The international, I think France has always impressed me, even at the regular école where I work. France is a very open place to international colleagues are encouraged. I've never seen it's not closed like some other places where you really have to understand this. Like, it's a difficult system to understand. But one of the things I'm most proud of about France is that they do go out and search for people from all over the world, really. I would say, at least in spirit, France is more open than the U.S. There are some countries that are sort of no-go in the United States, which are less no-go in France, for example. So international scholars are welcome.
In fact, actually, from a legal standpoint, it turns out that you're not allowed to be a government employee in France unless you are French. And so these permanent research and teaching jobs that you've been hearing about are actually, they are government jobs. If you're teaching at the university, you're a government employee. If you're in the CNRS, like Ken, you are a government employee, a lifetime government employee. And the teaching and the research positions are the only two exceptions to this national rule. Anybody of any nationality can become a government scientist or a government professor paid for by the government without having French citizenship. So that, I think that reinforces what Ken was saying about openness. And I think Elise could give us some insight into how HEC tries to attract international scholars.
Certainly. HEC Paris as a business school is a grande école by definition. So this is traditionally the grande école system, are the elite schools of France, initially created by Napoleon back in the day to create the leaders of the country, which have considerably more from intentionally from pure French schools to highly international ones. So speaking for HEC Paris, school is highly international, and the goal is to recruit the best professors regardless of nationality. So I would say that there's a great percentage of international scholars and professors on staff. So in fact, international scholars are highly encouraged to apply and to join a school like HEC Paris.
Yeah, and I think indeed, an important thing that we really want you to understand is that the requirement to know French very well to come work here is no longer the case.
Yes.
You can function at a high level with pure English. In fact, in my own lab, we have a significant number of students from China. They make efforts to learn a bit of French, but they function every day in English, both in the teams and in their everyday life. So that's been, again, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Terrence. I was just simply agreeing with you and adding from the HEC Paris perspective, and business schools in general, there's so many more masters that are being created these days. I mean, the landscape is shifting dramatically, and many of these are taught entirely in English. So certainly international scholars, students and scholars are welcome.
We have another question that just popped up on Slido, which we're gonna show you and then try to grapple with. So this is a tough one, and I think everybody should spend a minute or two on it individually, and then I think we're going to get kicked off. Shockingly, so Yang, could you start on this one? I think indeed, in mathematics, these questions of what do you start. I mean, you're probably already a very close professor when you get your PhD, right?
Yeah, I mean, so I think in the sciences, I think everybody does a postdoc, and I think maybe sadly the number of years you spend as a postdoc is increasing, and I think in theoretical physics or in mathematics, the typical number of years you do a postdoc, it's becoming something like 4 to 6 years before you apply for the equivalent of a tenure track assistant professor job. So I think in the sciences, it's almost the standard thing now. After your PhD, you do 4 to 6 years, sometimes more, of postdoctoral work.
Ken, is that the same? Yeah.
Yeah, I want to say I understand that completely, but it is different in France.
Is that right? Okay.
You have to be very careful, especially if you are French and you go to, say, the US system, and so you're a graduate student and then you do a postdoc in the US, make sure that you do come back to France after a couple of years, maybe one postdoc. If you go and do a 10-year postdoc or two postdocs, it will be very hard to get a position because there is pressure on a lot of these institutions to hire people for their first permanent position fairly young, a few years after their PhD. So I think that is a big difference. That is something that surprised me here, and it is true in the universities and in the CNRS. So if you do intend to come back to France, make sure that you stay in touch with people even a year or two after your PhD. You should be applying for the national competitions almost immediately, even during your first postdoc.
So is it? I don't know. I mean, I've always imagined. I kind of, there's some academic and research disciplines that are like marathon runners, and I think literature and the humanities have a bit of that solitude in the library, whereas the scientists always have a group full of 10 people to go back to, where there's everybody's talking and having problems that you get to help out with. Cary, what do you think? And the solitude, the marathon aspect, the solitary work aspect, maybe has an impact on the way that you can go from a PhD to junior positions, Cary?
Well, specific to postdocs, it's much less common to have a postdoc before taking a position in literature, in philosophy, history. It exists, but I think, Ken, you're absolutely right. You don't want to spend too much time on it. It's good to up your publication list, but there are sort of age brackets that are encouraged to be finding jobs. So you need to keep an eye on that. One thing which might not sort of be obvious from outside of France is that it's really common to teach for a few years, like in a high school, for example. After you finished your degree, as you are going through the process of looking for jobs. So if that takes you a year or two, it's not unusual for you to kind of take a teaching job, often in the region you want to be in, keep on participating in all the academic conferences and so on, and then move on from there.
Alex, how is it in economics?
It is not as common, but it's becoming more and more common, at least to, so in some of them, postdocs even are more prestigious than others. So Oxford actually has been very successful in having these, Nuffield is one of the colleges, so they have very successful postdoc that has become quite famous. You go there for 3 years, it's quite well known internationally, and then you go on the job market 3 years after, and the graduates from that quote-unquote program have gone on to find very good positions as assistant professors. And that model is being copied actually by other universities for various reasons. And it's good to look out for these positions, because sometimes universities are not as well organized, I guess, to advertise them all in one go when you have the normal job market cycle. So it's good to have look out for these positions, because they come up in different parts of the year, but then there's always flexibility in when you're going to start and where you're going to go after, even if you have a job lined up for later. So keep an eye out for these things.
Well, thank you all so much for this fabulous conversation. Eva, it's back to you.
Thank you so much for just such interesting country-specific context about the higher education landscape. I was taking so many notes, and I'm sure our graduate students were as well. The specific advice that you highlighted with the range of teaching, research, and administrative opportunities, and the options that graduate students might consider exploring within higher education across the globe. Truly fascinating, and I do believe this conversation could have gone on even much longer. So as you said, the virtual world does indeed offer advantages when it comes to convening our alumni across the globe. And we will indeed have to invite you back to join us again for another virtual conversation. Elise and Marina, if you're watching, thank you for volunteering to help assemble this wonderful group of alumni panelists. Thank you so much, Terrence, for serving as moderator for this terrific terrific conversation. Ken, Alexander, Cary, and Yang, thank you again for joining as well to offer your insights and your expert advice today. As I said, we truly do need to have you come back again. We are also truly grateful to our global Princeton alumni community. We encourage our graduate students to connect with our panelists, find you on LinkedIn if possible. And if you're willing to share advice via email as well, please do let us know. And thank you all again. This was a terrific conversation. And for many of you, I will say good afternoon. For some, I'll say good morning or good evening. But thank you again. We look forward to seeing you at another upcoming event.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.